January 1943. Dachau concentration camp, Nazi Germany. The outside temperature was minus 20 degrees Celsius, but inside Block 5, it was even colder. Not because of the weather, because of what was happening behind those steel doors that even the SS guards avoided opening without reason. In a white-tiled room, lit by blinding surgical lamps, a man was immersed up to his neck in a tank filled with ice water and chunks of ice. He was no longer screaming. His lips had turned blue, his skin a grayish hue, and his eyes stared at the ceiling with that expression only those who have faced death can recognize: utter surrender. Around him, 3 assistants in white coats were taking notes. One was measuring the water temperature with a medical thermometer. Another was timing the time elapsed since the immersion. The third, a young man with gaunt features and sunken eyes, was recording the prisoner's physiological reactions with mechanical precision, as if observing an experiment on a laboratory animal. And then there was him, Dr. Victor Falken. 42 years old, impeccably groomed blonde hair, steely blue eyes behind round glasses, his SS uniform always perfectly pressed. He stood before the vat, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the man's agony with the same expression as a botanist studying the growth of a rare plant. No anger, no apparent sadism, just a cold, methodical scientific curiosity. If you think that historical monsters always look like monsters, this story will prove you wrong. Because Victor Falken was no ordinary torturer. He was a respected doctor, a graduate of the University of Munich, a father of 2, and an active member of the German medical community. And yet, between 1942 and 1945, he tortured and killed hundreds of people in the name of science, the fatherland, and what he called medical progress to protect our soldiers on the Eastern Front. Subscribe now, because this isn't just the story of a criminal. It's the story of what happens when intelligent, educated, cultured men decide that some lives are worthless. And it's also the story of another doctor, a Jewish prisoner, who was forced to become an accomplice. Before becoming a vigilante, the man in the tank had stopped trembling. His eyelids were fluttering faintly. Victor Falken leaned forward slightly, scrutinizing the prisoner's dilated pupils, then signaled to the assistant who was timing. Time elapsed? Quarantine 7 minutes, doctor. Body temperature? Another assistant inserted a rectal thermometer. A few seconds of silence. 28 degrees, Herr Doctor. Victor nodded, satisfied. Good. Take him out. We're going to test warming protocol number 3. He turned to the young Jewish doctor who was keeping the log. Mercer, you write everything down, every detail, every reaction. Is that understood? Elias Mercer looked up from his notebook. His hands were trembling slightly, but he maintained a neutral voice. Yes, Herr Doctor. 2 inmates in striped uniforms lifted the prisoner's body from the tank. His skin was mottled purple and white. His limbs were rigid. They placed him on a metal stretcher, and Victor Falken approached with a lamp to examine his extremities. Fingers, toes, earlobes. Everything was necrotic, frozen from the inside out. Very good, Victor murmured. Now we'll quickly warm him up with successive hot baths and observe the cardiovascular response. If the heart holds up, we'll have valuable data for the soldiers on the Russian front. Elias Mercer wrote mechanically in his notebook. But inside, something broke a little more each day, because he knew what was going to happen. The prisoner was going to die, not immediately, not cleanly. He would scream in agony as his body tried to warm itself. His blood vessels would burst under the pressure, and he would die within hours in unbearable agony. And tomorrow, there would be another, and the day after, yet another. But Elias didn't protest. Because he had understood one terrible thing since arriving at Dachau 6 months earlier. As long as he was useful, as long as he obeyed, as long as he played his role as a silent scribe, he would stay alive. And staying alive was all that mattered, or at least that's what he told himself every night, as he closed his eyes in his barracks, trying to forget the faces of those he had seen die. What Elias didn't yet know was that he would soon have to choose between staying alive and remaining human, and that this choice would haunt him for 50 years. Victor Falken wasn't born a monster, Perhaps that's the most terrifying thing about him. In 1901, he was born into a middle-class family in Bavaria. His father was a pharmacist, his mother a teacher. As a child, he adored natural sciences, collected insects and dissected frogs to understand their anatomy. At 17, he entered the Munich Faculty of Medicine with top marks in his class. In 1925, he earned his doctorate with a brilliant dissertation on the effects of extreme cold on the human circulatory system, a theoretical thesis based on case studies of shipwrecked sailors and mountaineers lost in the snow. But in 1933, everything changed. Hitler came to power. Viktor Falken, like thousands of other German doctors, joined the Nazi Party. Not out of fanaticism, not out of hatred, out of opportunism, out of ambition. Because in Nazi Germany, a doctor who was a party member could obtain funding, laboratories, prestigious positions. And Viktor Falken wanted to be respected. He wanted to be recognized. He wanted his name to go down in the history books of medicine. In 1939, war broke out. German soldiers invaded Poland, then France, and then launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. And there, a major problem arose: the cold. The Russian winter killed more German soldiers than enemy bullets. Thousands of men died of hypothermia in the frozen trenches of Stalingrad and Leningrad. The SS High Command sought solutions, including medical protocols to protect the troops from the extreme cold. And that's where Viktor Falken saw his opportunity. In 1941, he proposed a research program on hypothermia to Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS. "Give me a laboratory, experimental subjects, and I'll provide you with survival protocols for our soldiers," he promised. Himmler agreed. Viktor was appointed chief physician of Block 5 at Dachau. He was given free rein. He was provided with everything he needed: medical equipment, assistance, and above all, an unlimited supply of subjects: Jewish prisoners, political prisoners, Roma, homosexuals, human beings whom the Nazi regime considered subhuman, and therefore usable for science. And Viktor Falken begins to work, enthusiastically, methodically, with a total lack of empathy that is still chilling today. The first experiments were simple. Prisoners were placed naked in vats of ice water and kept submerged until their body temperature dropped below 28 degrees Celsius. Viktor timed how long it took for them to lose consciousness, how long it took for their hearts to stop, and what the warning signs of death were. Everything was noted, measured, and documented. Because for Viktor, they weren't human beings. They were data, graphs, statistics. Next, he moves on to the warming tests. Because what the German army is really interested in is how to bring a frozen soldier back to life. Viktor tries everything: hot baths, heated blankets, adrenaline injections, blood transfusions. But most of the prisoners die during the warming process. Their blood vessels burst. Their organs fail. Their hearts give out. Viktor doesn't care. He simply notes: ineffective protocol. Continue testing. In 2 years, more than 300 people died in Block 5, some within hours, others over several days in prolonged agony. Viktor Falken regularly sent detailed reports to Berlin, accompanied by graphs, photos, and recommendations for the army. He was praised, promoted, decorated. Because for the Nazi regime, he was a hero, a dedicated scientist who sacrificed his comfort to save the lives of German soldiers. But there is someone who sees everything, someone who records every death, every torture, every stifled cry, someone who, day after day, silently loses a little more of their humanity. Elias Mercer. He was 32 years old when he arrived at Dachau. A doctor, a graduate of the University of Warsaw, a Polish Jew, arrested during a raid in 1942. His wife and 2 children had been sent to Auschwitz. He would never see them again. He had been selected for Dachau because he spoke German and had medical skills. A stroke of luck, he had been told. A chance to survive. At first, Elias thought he would be assisting Viktor Falken in genuine medical research, that he might even save lives. But within the first week, he understood the truth. He wasn't an assistant. He was a forced witness, a scribe of horror. His role was to document the experiments, keep records, and note the victims' reactions as they slowly died before his eyes. And he did it. Because he was terrified, because he wanted to survive, because he had convinced himself that if he obeyed, if he made himself indispensable, perhaps one day he could find his family again. Perhaps he could bear witness. Perhaps he could tell the world what was happening here. But every day this justification became harder to believe. Every day, watching Victor Falcon submerge a man in ice water with the same indifference a cook would show while plunging vegetables into a pot, Elias felt something dying inside him. And he wondered, at what point does a man cease to be a witness and become an accomplice? One evening in February 1943, as Elias was returning to his barracks, another prisoner approached him, a Pole named Marek, who worked in the kitchens. "Mercer," he whispered, "they say you work for Falcon, for the butcher in Block 5. Elias lowered his eyes. "I have no choice. We always have a choice," Marek replied coldly. "You can refuse. You can resist. And die the next day. It is better to die on your feet than to live on your knees helping a monster kill our brothers." Elias felt a dull rage rising within him. "You think it's easy? You think I don't see their faces every night? But if I die, who will tell what happens here? Who will bear witness?" Marek stared at him for a long time, then shook his head. "Keep telling yourself that, Mercer. But remember, there's a difference between surviving and collaborating." Those words remained etched in Elias's mind, because deep down, he knew Marek was right. He knew he was lying to himself, and he knew that sooner or later, he would have to face that truth. That moment came 3 weeks later, when Victor Falcon brought a group of children into Block 5. It was a Tuesday morning in March 1943. Elias was cleaning surgical instruments in the laboratory when he heard children's voices in the corridor. High-pitched, frightened voices, asking questions in Yiddish and Polish. His blood ran cold. He turned slowly and saw Victor Falcon enter the room, followed by 6 children aged 8 to 12, all dressed in the striped uniforms of prisoners, all with yellow stars sewn onto their chests. "Hello, children," said Victor with an almost fatherly smile. "Don't be afraid, we're just going to do some medical tests. Nothing painful, I promise." Elias felt his hands tremble. He put down the scalpel he was holding and looked Victor straight in the eyes. "Herr Doctor, they are children." Victor turned to him, and for the first time in months, Elias saw something cross the Nazi doctor's gaze. Not anger, not surprise, something worse, amusement. "Mercer, you're a doctor, aren't you?" Victor asked calmly. "You know as well as I do that pediatric data is essential for understanding differentiated physiological responses. Children have a different metabolism, a different body surface area to mass ratio. If we want to protect our young soldiers, we need to understand how young bodies react to extreme cold." "They are not subjects of study," Elias murmured. "They are children." Victor approached him, so close that Elias could smell his cologne. "In this laboratory, Mercer, there are no children. There are only specimens, and you'd better remember that if you want to continue breathing the air of this camp." Then he turned to the children and gestured for them to sit on the metal chairs lined up against the wall. "Be good. Dr. Mercer is going to take your temperatures and weights. Then we'll do a quick cold resistance test, very simple, very quick." One of the children, a little girl with short black hair, timidly raised her hand. "Sir, afterwards, can we go back to see our mothers?" Victor smiled. "Of course, my darling. Of course." Elias knew it was a lie. These children no longer had mothers. Their mothers had likely died in the gas chambers of Auschwitz or Treblinka, and soon these children would join them. Except they wouldn't die quickly. They would die slowly, in agony, while Victor Falcon took notes on their death throes. At that precise moment, something inside Elias Mercer broke forever. It wasn't rage. It wasn't rebellion. It was something colder, more calculated. A silent decision that formed in his mind like ice forming on a lake in winter. He was going to kill Victor Falcon. Not today, not tomorrow. But one day, one way or another, he would do it. and he would do it in such a way that no one could ever suspect it. But to understand how Elias Mercer went from compassionate doctor to silent executioner, we must go back in time. We must understand who he was before the war transformed him into a shadow of his former self. Elias was born in 1910 in Warsaw, into a middle-class Jewish family. His father owned a bookstore on Nalewki Street, in the Jewish quarter. His mother gave piano lessons. As a child, Elias was curious, studious, and passionate about science. At 16, he decided to become a doctor. Not for fame, not for money, because he wanted to help people. Because he sincerely believed that medicine was the noblest of professions. He had studied diligently, earned his degree at 24, and opened a small practice in the Praga district of Warsaw. He treated mostly poor families, often accepting payment in kind: a chicken, a sack of potatoes, a bottle of homemade vodka. He was happy. In 1936, he married Ruth, a school teacher with green eyes and an infectious laugh. In 1938, their first child was born, a boy they named David. In 1940, a daughter, Sarah. Then, in September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Warsaw fell in less than a month. The Nazis immediately instituted anti-Jewish laws. They were forbidden to practice medicine, to own property, and forced to wear the yellow star. By 1940, the entire Jewish population of Warsaw had been confined to a ghetto. 400,000 people crammed into a space designed for 100,000. Hunger, disease, death everywhere. Elias had continued to treat people clandestinely, without equipment, without medicine, with just his hands and his knowledge. He had seen children die of typhus, old people die of starvation, mothers die in childbirth because there was no anesthesia. And every day, he wondered, how long before it gets even worse? The answer came in July 1942. The mass deportations had begun. Every day, thousands of Jews were loaded onto freight trains bound for the East, officially to work. In reality, to die. Elias knew it. Everyone knew it, even if no one dared say it out loud. One morning in August 1942, the SS came knocking at his door. Ruth and the children were home. The soldiers immediately separated the families. Ruth, David, and Sarah were herded into a truck with dozens of other women and children. Elias screamed, begged, and tried to join them. An officer struck him on the head with the butt of his rifle. "You're coming with us. You're a doctor. You can be useful." That was the last time he saw his family, the last time he heard Sarah's voice calling Dad in the chaos of leaving, the last time he met Ruth's gaze, that gaze that said, "Protect yourself. Live. Tell our story." He was taken to Dachau 3 days later, and for 6 months, he survived. Day after day, hour after hour, repeating to himself that he had to stay alive to bear witness, to tell what the Nazis did, to ensure that the world never forgets. But now, faced with these 6 children who were about to be tortured in the name of science, Elias understood that bearing witness wasn't enough. Surviving wasn't enough. Sometimes the only thing left to do is act, even if it meant becoming a murderer. Victor Falcon, on the other hand, had never faced this kind of moral dilemma. For a simple reason. He did not consider prisoners to be human beings. In his mind, shaped by years of Nazi propaganda and racial pseudoscience, Jews weren't really people. They were parasites, pests, just like the rats he dissected when he was a medical student. So, using them for medical experiments wasn't immoral. It made sense, it was even patriotic. Victor sincerely believed he was doing something important, that he was contributing to the war effort, that he was saving the lives of real human beings, German soldiers. And if, to do so, he had to sacrifice a few hundred subhumans, well, that was the price to pay for progress. He didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as a pioneer, a courageous researcher ready to do what other doctors didn't dare. And besides, his superiors confirmed it. Heinrich Himmler himself had visited his laboratory in January 1943 and congratulated him personally. "You are doing remarkable work, Dr. Falcon. The Führer would be proud of you." This recognition galvanized him. He worked even harder, even more methodically. He perfected his protocols. He looked for new variables to test, and when he returned home in the evening to his comfortable apartment in Munich, he kissed his wife Ingrid, played with his children Klaus and Greta, and went to bed with the clear conscience of a man who had done his duty. His wife never asked him for details about his work. She knew he worked in a camp, she knew it was classified. She didn't want to know more, and Victor said nothing, because deep down even he knew there was something profoundly disturbing about what he was doing, something you don't talk about around the dinner table. But he pushed those thoughts away. He focused on the results, on the graphs, on the reports he sent to Berlin, on the medal he hoped to receive one day, on his place in the history of German medicine. What Victor Falken didn't know was that history would indeed remember him, but not in the way he hoped. The following days were a waking nightmare for Elias. Victor had begun the experiments on the children exactly as he had with the adults: gradual immersion in ice water, measurement of body temperature, observation of signs of distress, and meticulous recording of every detail. The difference was that the children died faster. Their small bodies didn't have the fat and energy reserves of adults. In less than an hour, their temperature plummeted to critical levels. And unlike adults, who eventually lost consciousness, the children remained conscious longer. They called for their mothers. They begged to be pulled from the water. They cried. And Elias was there, standing next to Victor, holding his notebook, noting everything. Every cry, every plea, every second of agony. On the third day, the little girl with dark hair, the one who had asked if she could go back to see her mother, died in the tank. Her heart had given out after 38 minutes of immersion. Victor Falken simply shrugged. Congenital heart defect, probably. Make a note of that. Mercer. Elias had taken note, with trembling hands and silent tears that he discreetly wiped away so no one would see them. But inside, something had definitely shifted. That night, when he returned to his barracks, he didn't sleep. He lay on his straw mattress, eyes open in the darkness, and began to plan. Not impulsively, not emotionally, methodically, scientifically. Exactly as Victor Falken planned his experiments. He knew the lab inside and out. He knew the protocols. He knew the system's weaknesses. And above all, he knew Victor. His habits. His routines. His arrogance. Victor Falken believed himself untouchable. He believed himself superior. He saw Elias as nothing more than a docile, broken assistant, incapable of the slightest rebellion. And it was precisely this arrogance that Elias would exploit. Because Victor had forgotten something essential. Elias Mercer was also a doctor. He understood human physiology. He knew about poisons. He knew how to kill someone without leaving obvious traces. And in a laboratory filled with chemicals, medical instruments, and experimental protocols, there were 1,000 ways to make a murder look like an accident. Elias began to observe, to memorize, to plan every detail. He knew he would only have one chance, that if he failed, he would die. But now he didn't care, because he had understood something fundamental. There are things worse than death, and one of them is remaining passive in the face of absolute evil. April 1943. Spring was just beginning to warm Bavaria, but inside Block 5 the temperature remained frigid. Victor Falken had intensified his experiments. He was no longer working solely on immersion hypothermia. He was also testing exposure to cold air, combinations of wind and sub-zero temperatures, and the effects of simulated altitude combined with extreme cold. His goal was to create a comprehensive survival manual for the Wehrmacht, a guide that would enable German soldiers to survive in the most extreme conditions on the Eastern Front. For this, he needed more data, more subjects, more experiments, and he obtained them without difficulty. The camp commandant, on direct orders from Berlin, supplied him with a constant stream of prisoners. Men, women, children, all considered disposable, all destined to die anyway. Their deaths might as well serve some purpose, Victor reasoned. Elias observed all of this with newfound clarity. Ever since he had decided to kill Victor Falken, his mind worked differently. Fear had transformed into calculation, despair into strategy. He no longer thought like a victim. He thought like a hunter. But killing Victor wouldn't be easy. The Nazi doctor was protected by his status, by his SS uniform, by the entire Reich's terror machine. If Elias attempted anything obvious, a direct attack, he would be shot on the spot. Worse still, the Nazis would make an example of him. They would publicly execute 10 other prisoners in retaliation. Elias couldn't let that happen. No, if he wanted to kill Victor Falken, he had to do it subtly, undetectable. He had to make the death look like an accident, or better yet, a natural consequence of Victor's own experiments. The irony would be perfect. The doctor of the cold dying of the cold. Elias began by meticulously studying all the experimental protocols. Every evening when he returned to his barracks, he would review the day's procedures, memorizing every detail, searching for flaws. And slowly, a plan began to take shape. Victor Falken had a peculiar habit. Every week, he personally tested various cold weather gear, thermal jackets, insulated gloves, and respirators. He wanted to understand firsthand what soldiers experienced. He voluntarily exposed himself to sub-zero temperatures for short periods, always under supervision, always with assistants ready to intervene if anything went wrong. It was a demonstration of courage in his view. Proof that he wasn't asking anything of his subjects that he wouldn't be prepared to endure himself. Of course, the difference was obvious. Victor could stop the experiment at any time. The prisoners couldn't. But this nuance didn't seem to trouble the Nazi doctor's conscience. Elias saw an opportunity in this habit. If Victor regularly exposed himself to the cold, all he had to do was create a situation where the exposure would become fatal. But how? How could he transform a controlled test into a fatal accident without arousing suspicion? The answer came to him one morning in mid-April, during a particularly brutal experiment. Victor was testing the effect of immersion in ice water combined with an injection of barbiturates, a sedative drug. The hypothesis was that if a soldier were wounded and fell into a frozen river, the pain medication administered could affect his ability to survive the cold. The prisoner, a man in his 40s, had been injected with phenobarbital before being submerged. He died in less than 20 minutes. His respiratory system, already weakened by malnutrition and mistreatment, could not withstand the combination of the drug and hypothermia. Victor simply noted, confirmed negative interaction, absolute contraindication of barbiturates in cases of severe hypothermia. But Elias noticed something else. He noted that barbiturates slowed reflexes, impaired judgment, and reduced the body's ability to regulate its temperature. And he noted that Victor kept a large supply of these drugs in the laboratory cabinet, accessible only with a key he always carried with him. Except Elias had discovered something. There was a duplicate of that key, a duplicate that Victor kept in his desk drawer under a pile of files, just in case he lost the main key. Victor had shown it to him one day almost absent-mindedly when he asked him to put away some documents. This was valuable information, but Elias had to be patient. He couldn't act immediately. He had to wait for the right moment, the moment when everything would fall into place. That moment arrived on May 7, 1943. That day, Victor announced he was going to conduct an important demonstration. SS officers from Berlin were coming to inspect the laboratory, and Victor wanted to show them the effectiveness of his new thermal protection protocol. He would expose himself to a temperature of -15 degrees Celsius in the laboratory's cold chamber, wearing a thermal suit of his own design. "This will be a perfect demonstration," he proudly told Elias. "We will prove that our soldiers can withstand the worst conditions with the right equipment." Elias nodded silently, but inwardly, his mind was already calculating. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The cold room was an isolated, hermetically sealed chamber where Victor could simulate Arctic temperatures. An industrial refrigeration system lowered the temperature, and fans created frigid wind conditions. Inside, it was easy to recreate the conditions of Stalingrad or the Arctic Circle. The standard protocol was simple. Victor entered the cold room, equipped with his thermal suit and a stopwatch. 2 assistants monitored him from outside through a small porthole. After 15 minutes, Victor came out, and his body temperature was measured to check the effectiveness of the equipment. But Elias knew of a flaw in this protocol. A flaw that no one else had noticed because no one else had any reason to try to kill Victor Falcon. The lock on the cold room door. It could be locked from the outside. Normally, it remained unlocked during testing, so Victor could leave at any time. But if someone locked it while he was inside, Victor would be trapped. Of course, he would shout. He would bang on the door. The assistants would hear and open it immediately, unless the assistants were elsewhere, unless something was taking them away from the room at the critical moment. Elias began to refine his plan. He would have to create a diversion, something that would force the assistants to leave the room for a few minutes. Long enough for Victor, trapped in the extreme cold, to begin suffering from hypothermia. But not long enough for it to seem suspicious. And he should make sure that Victor would be particularly vulnerable, that his body wouldn't be able to withstand it for as long as usual. That's where barbiturates came into play. The day before the demonstration, Elias found an excuse to stay alone in the lab after Victor left. He claimed he needed to finish putting away the instruments and cleaning the surfaces. Victor, eager to get home to prepare his presentation for the next day, accepted without suspicion. As soon as the door closed behind the Nazi doctor, Elias went to the desk. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the drawer and retrieved the emergency key to the medicine cabinet. He knew he was crossing a line, that after this there would be no turning back. He opened the cabinet and took out a bottle of liquid phenobarbital. Then he went to the small kitchen adjoining the laboratory, where Victor kept a thermos of coffee that he always drank before his personal tests. "To stay alert and focused," he said. Elias poured a carefully calculated dose of phenobarbital into the coffee. Not enough to make Victor fall asleep immediately, not enough to alter the taste, just enough to slow his reflexes, to slightly lower his core body temperature, to weaken his resistance to cold. Then he put the bottle back in place, closed the cabinet, returned the key to the drawer, and left the laboratory. His heart was beating so hard he felt like the whole camp could hear it. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay on his straw mattress, mentally rehearsing each step of his plan, searching for weaknesses, wondering if he had the courage to go through with it. Part of him, the part that had been a doctor, that had taken the Hippocratic Oath, that believed in the value of every human life, screamed that he couldn't do this, that killing Victor Falcon would make him a murderer, that no matter Victor's crimes, Elias had no right to act as judge, jury, and executioner. But another part of him, the part that had seen hundreds of people die in excruciating pain, the part that had heard the cries of children in the ice vats, the part that knew that as long as Victor Falcon breathed, other innocent people would die. That part replied, "And if you do nothing, how many more will die while you cling to your principles?" Early that morning, Elias had made his decision. He would go all the way, not because he believed he was right, but because he could no longer live with himself if he remained passive. On May 7, 1943, at 10 o'clock in the morning, SS officers from Berlin arrived at Block 5. 3 men in impeccable uniforms, with glittering decorations on their chests. Victor Falcon greeted them with almost childlike enthusiasm. This was his big moment, the opportunity to demonstrate to High Command the importance of his research. "Gentlemen," he declared proudly, "today you will witness a demonstration that could revolutionize our approach to survival in hostile environments. Thanks to my research and the equipment I have developed, our soldiers will be able to withstand temperatures that would otherwise have been lethal." He gave them a tour of the laboratory, showing them the experiment logs, data graphs, and protective equipment. The officers nodded their heads in admiration. One of them asked, "And this data, Dr. Falcon, how exactly was it obtained?" Victor gestured vaguely towards the barracks. "We use volunteer subjects from among the prisoners. They are happy to contribute to the war effort." Elias, standing in a corner of the room, gritted his teeth. Volunteers. The lie was so ludicrous it was almost comical, but the officers seemed satisfied with this explanation. "Good," said one of them. "Show us that demonstration." Victor smiled. "With pleasure. I will personally enter the cold room and demonstrate the effectiveness of our Mark III thermal suit." He went to the small kitchen and poured the coffee from his thermos into a cup. Elias watched him drink, feeling his stomach clench. The phenobarbital was now in Victor's system. In 20 minutes it would start to take effect. Victor put on the thermal suit, a set of insulating layers with air pockets and reflective materials. He looked like a polar explorer. The temperature inside will be minus 15 degrees, with a simulated wind of 40 kilometers per hour. Typical conditions for the Stalingrad front. I'll stay inside for 15 minutes. He turned to his two usual assistants, two young German doctors named Schmidt and Weber. You watch from outside. If I knock on the door before 15 minutes are up, it means something is wrong. Otherwise, you open it for me exactly 15 minutes later. Then he looked at Elias. Mercer, you will remain here to note the officer's observations. I want a detailed account of this demonstration. Elias nodded. His plan now required the second step, to get the assistants away. Victor entered the cold room. The heavy door closed behind him with a metallic clang. Through the small porthole, he could be seen standing in the center of the room, checking his stopwatch. The fan started up, creating a swirl of cold visible through the fogged glass. Assistants Schmidt and Weber stood in front of the porthole, ready to intervene. The three SS officers watched with interest. Elias knew he had about 5 minutes before the phenobarbital would really start to affect Victor. 5 minutes to create his diversion. He waited 3 minutes. Then, with an apparently clumsy gesture, he dropped a tray of surgical instruments, which crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter. Scalpels, forceps, and syringes scattered everywhere. Excuse me, he said. Pardon. One of the SS officers frowned, annoyed by the interruption. But what was more important was that several syringes had rolled into the adjacent corridor. Schmidt, Weber, the officer ordered curtly. Help this incompetent prisoner pick it up before someone steps on it. The two assistants hesitated, glancing out of the cold room window. Victor was still standing, seemingly steady. Schnell, barked the officer. Dr. Falken is fine. It will only take a minute. Schmidt and Weber moved away from the window to help Elias gather the instruments. And at that precise moment, Elias did the thing he had been planning for weeks. As he bent down to pick up a scalpel, he approached the door of the cold room, and with a quick, discreet movement, he turned the bolt. Click. Victor Falken was now locked up. The lock made a barely audible metallic sound, drowned out by the clatter of instruments being gathered and the irritated comments of the SS officer. No one noticed. Elias rose slowly, clutching a handful of scalpels, his heart pounding so hard he feared it could be heard. He had just crossed the point of no return. Victor Falken was locked in a cold room at minus 15 degrees Celsius, with phenobarbital circulating in his blood, slowing his metabolism and diminishing his ability to regulate his body temperature. Now, all that was left to do was wait. Schmidt and Weber finished gathering the instruments and returned to the porthole. Elias watched them out of the corner of his eye as he put the scalpels away on the tray. Through the fogged glass, Victor could be seen standing in the center of the cold room, seemingly steady. He was checking his stopwatch. Everything appeared normal, but Elias knew what was really happening. The phenobarbital was starting to take effect. Victor probably felt a little dizzy, a little sluggish. Nothing alarming yet. He would likely attribute this feeling to the cold, the fatigue, the stress of the demonstration in front of the Berlin officers. He would have no idea he had been poisoned. The minutes ticked by unbearably slowly. Elias stood near the observation table, a notebook in his hand, pretending to take notes. In reality, he was watching Victor through the porthole, alert for the first signs of distress. 7 minutes had passed. Victor was still standing, but he seemed to be moving a little more slowly. He had a hand on his head, as if he were feeling dizzy. 8 minutes. Victor leaned against the wall of the cold room. His legs seemed less stable. Is he all right? Asked one of the officers, noticing the change in posture. That's normal, Schmidt replied confidently. The body adapts to the cold. Dr. Falken knows what he's doing. 9 minutes. Victor fell to his knees. Even through the frosted glass, Elias could see that something was wrong. The Nazi doctor was now bringing his hands to his face, clearly trying to concentrate. "Something's wrong," Weber murmured, worried. "He shouldn't be on his knees. He may be testing the survival position," suggested one of the officers, unconvinced. 10 minutes. Victor collapsed completely to the floor. His body was shaking uncontrollably. Through the porthole, he could be seen trying to crawl towards the door. "My God!" exclaimed Schmidt. "We have to get him out." He rushed to the door and pulled on the handle. Nothing. The door wouldn't open. He pulled harder, panicking. "It's locked." "What?" Weber joined him and tried it himself. "Impossible. It wasn't locked." The 3 SS officers approached, looking stern. "What's going on here?" "The door won't open," shouted Schmidt, now completely panicked. Through the porthole, they could see Victor Falken huddled on the floor, trembling violently, weakly trying to knock on the door. Weber examined the mechanism. The lock has been turned." "Then unlock it, Dummkopf," yelled the officer. Weber turned the bolt and pulled the door open. It finally swung open with a blast of icy air that filled the room. Schmidt and the 2 assistants rushed inside and dragged Victor Falken out. The Nazi doctor was in critical condition. His skin was pale, almost gray. His lips were blue. His body was trembling uncontrollably. His eyes were open but glassy, barely conscious. "Blankets! Hot water! Quick!" Weber ordered, tearing open Victor's thermal suit. "He's severely hypothermic." They laid him on a stretcher and began the warming procedures that Victor himself had developed. Heated blankets, an IV drip of warm fluids, and gentle cardiac massage to stimulate circulation. The SS officers watched the scene with a mixture of confusion and anger. "How is this possible?" one of them asked. "The suit was supposed to protect him." "I don't understand," Schmidt stammered, his hands trembling. "The lock. Who locked the door?" All eyes turned towards the room. There were only 6 people present. The 3 officers, Schmidt, Weber, and Elias. "The Jewish prisoner was near the door," one of the officers said slowly, his eyes resting on Elias. "When he was picking up the instruments." Elias felt his blood run cold, but he kept a neutral, almost confused expression. "I was picking up the scalpels, Herr Offizier. I didn't touch anything else." "Search him," the officer ordered. 2 SS soldiers guarding the entrance to Block 5 were summoned. They searched Elias from head to toe. Nothing. No weapon. No evidence. Just a skeletal prisoner in a striped uniform, trembling with apparent fear. "Perhaps the lock engaged by itself," suggested Weber, desperate to find an explanation. "A mechanical defect?" "The locks don't engage by themselves," the officer replied coldly. Then he turned to Elias. You were Dr. Falken's assistant. You knew about this equipment. You had a motive." Elias lowered his eyes, adopting the servile attitude that all prisoners learn to adopt in order to survive. "Herr Offizier, I don't understand what happened. I just dropped the tray, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." The officer stared at him for a long time, searching for a sign of guilt, of satisfaction, of something. But Elias had practiced that expression for months. The empty expression. The expression of the broken prisoner who no longer thinks, who no longer feels, who simply obeys. Finally, the officer turned away in disgust. "It doesn't matter who did this. What matters now is saving Dr. Falken." But after 30 minutes of attempts to warm him up, it became clear that Victor Falken would not escape unscathed. His body temperature was slowly rising, but he remained unconscious. His extremities, fingers and toes, showed signs of severe frostbite. And most importantly, his neurological reflexes were abnormal. "He needs to be transferred to the hospital in Munich," Weber decided. "He needs specialized care." An ambulance was called. Victor Falken was taken away on a stretcher, still unconscious, his face deathly pale. The SS officers left Block 5 in tense silence, promising a thorough investigation, and Elias remained alone in the laboratory, surrounded by the torture instruments that had been used to kill hundreds of innocent people. He sat down slowly on a chair, his legs no longer supporting him. He had succeeded. Victor Falcon wasn't dead, not yet, but he was seriously injured. And most importantly, he would never be able to continue his experiments. Block 5 would likely be closed during the investigation. The prisoners who would have died in the following weeks would be spared. Elias had saved lives, but at what cost? Because by killing Victor Falcon, by condemning him to the hypothermia that mirrored the torture he inflicted on others, Elias had crossed an invisible line. He was no longer just a victim. He was no longer just a witness. He had become something else, a murderer. Even if the victim was a monster, even if the act could be morally justified, Elias knew he had just changed something fundamental within himself, and he didn't know if he could ever go back. That night in his barracks, Merrick approached him, the Pole who had accused him of collaboration a few weeks earlier. But this time, his gaze was different. "Mercer," he whispered. "I heard what happened in Block 5. Falcon is in the hospital. Some say it was an accident. Others say the lock was sabotaged." Elias didn't reply. He stared at the rotten wooden ceiling of the barracks. "I don't know what really happened," Merrick continued. "But if someone had the courage to do what needed to be done, then that person has my utmost admiration." Elias closed his eyes. Admiration. That was exactly what he didn't want, because admiration implied pride. And he felt no pride, just immense weariness and a question that haunted him. Was he really any different from Victor Falcon now? Victor used science to justify murder. Elias used justice to justify murder. But in the end, both decided that a human life could be sacrificed for a greater purpose. This thought terrified him more than anything he had experienced so far. The following days brought conflicting news. Victor Falcon was alive, but in an induced coma. Doctors in Munich were trying to save his frostbitten limbs, but the frostbite was too severe. There was talk of amputations. There was talk of irreversible brain damage due to prolonged hypothermia. Block 5 was indeed temporarily closed. An investigation was launched. Assistants Schmidt and Weber were questioned for hours. Elias was too. But without tangible evidence, without direct witnesses, the investigation stalled. Ultimately, the official report concluded that it was a tragic accident caused by a mechanical failure of the locking mechanism, combined with an unforeseen reaction to the experimental conditions. The brilliant career of Dr. Victor Falcon, a pioneer in hypothermia research, had ended in the cruelest irony, a victim of his own experiment. The camp commandant decided not to reopen Block 5. The hypothermia experiments were transferred to another camp under the direction of a different doctor. Elias was reassigned to forced labor in an armaments factory. It was exhausting, dangerous work, but at least he no longer had to watch people die slowly in vats of ice. He no longer had to record their agonies in a notebook. He no longer had to pretend it was science when it was nothing more than pure and simple torture. But the guilt remained. Every night, Elias saw Victor Falcon's face through the frosted porthole. He saw his glassy eyes, his blue skin, his trembling body. And he wondered, had he been right? Philosophically, morally, ethically, was he right to kill a man, even a monster, in cold blood? There was no easy answer. Because life never offers easy answers in extreme situations. Sometimes, there are only impossible choices between different forms of evil, and you have to live with the consequences. 3 weeks after the incident, an SS guard came to the factory to get Elias. "The commander wants to see you." Elias felt his stomach clench. It was over. They had found evidence. They were going to execute him. He was led to the office of the commandant, a massive man with a stern face named Sturmbannführer Koch. The commandant was sitting behind his desk, reading a document. He looked up when Elias entered. "Prisoner Mercer," he said coldly. "I received a report from the Munich hospital. Dr. Falcon died last night. Post-hypothermic complications. Heart failure." Elias remained motionless, showing no emotion. But inside, Something tightened in his chest. Victor Falcon was dead. The man he had condemned was dead. The investigation into the incident is closed, Koch continued. Verdict, accident. But I'll tell you something, Mercer. I don't believe in accidents. I think someone sabotaged that door, and I think that someone is you. Elias remained silent. But I have no proof, Koch admitted with a humorless smile. And frankly, Falcon wasn't very popular, even among us. His experiments were expensive and didn't produce useful results. So I'm going to pretend I believe the official report. He stood up and approached Elias, so close that their faces were only centimeters apart. But know this, Judenschwein. If you ever do anything that attracts my attention, I will have you shot personally. Is that clear? Oui, Herr Sturmbannführer, murmured Elias. Now, disappear from my sight. Elias left the office, his legs trembling. He was free. Well, as free as a concentration camp prisoner could be. Victor Falcon was dead. Block 5 was sealed off. The experiments had stopped. He had won. But the victory had the bitter taste of ashes, because Elias Mercer now knew something terrible about himself. Under the right circumstances, with the right justifications, he was capable of killing, and this knowledge would never leave him. Years later, when he tried to explain what he had felt that day, he would say, I killed a monster. But in doing so, I became a little bit of a monster myself. And that's the real price of revenge. It's not what it does to your enemy, it's what it does to you. May 1945. 2 years had passed since Victor Falcon's death. 2 years during which Elias Mercer had survived the hell of Dachau, working 12 hours a day in the armaments factory, sleeping on a lice-infested straw mattress, eating thin soup and a piece of black bread. 2 years during which he had seen thousands of prisoners die of hunger, disease, exhaustion, or summary execution. But now, on this morning of April 29th, 1945, something extraordinary was happening. Rumors were circulating in the camp. Wild, unbelievable rumors that no one dared believe for fear of being disappointed. The Americans were approaching. Elias stood near the barbed wire, watching the SS guards rush about, burning documents, loading trucks, clearly preparing for a hasty evacuation. The atmosphere was electric. Some guards had already deserted during the night. Others seemed undecided, unsure whether to stay or flee. Around noon, the distant sound of tank engines could be heard, then sporadic gunfire, and suddenly at precisely 5:30 p.m., the camp gates opened. Soldiers in American uniforms entered, Sherman tanks smashing through the barbed wire, GIs with expressions of absolute horror as they discovered what lay inside. Dachau was liberated. The surviving prisoners, those who could still walk, slowly emerged from their barracks. Some were crying. Others remained silent, as if unable to grasp that the nightmare was over. American soldiers distributed rations, water, and blankets. They took photographs, interrogated the survivors, and arrested the SS guards who had not managed to escape. Elias stood in the middle of this surreal scene, feeling his legs tremble. He was free. After 3 years of captivity, he was free. But freedom had a strange taste, because there was nothing and no one waiting for him outside. His wife Ruth was dead. His children David and Sarah were dead. His parents were dead. All his friends from Warsaw were dead. He had survived. But for what? A young American lieutenant approached him. "Sir, do you speak English?" Elias nodded. He had learned a little English before the war. "Yes, a little." "We're documenting what happened here. Can you tell us what you saw?" Elias looked at the lieutenant, a young man, barely 25, with innocent blue eyes that had never seen what Elias had seen. How could he explain? How could he put words to 3 years of horror? There was a doctor, Kommensatielentmann, a Nazi doctor, Victor Falcon. He did experiments on prisoners, freezing experiments. Le lieutenant sortit en carnet. Where is this doctor now? Dead 2 years ago, an accident during one of his experiments. Le lieutenant nota. Do you have any documentation? Any proof of these experiments? Elias hesitated. Then he remembered. The notebooks, the records he had kept for months, noting every experiment, every death, every torture. They were probably still in Block 5 if the SS hadn't destroyed them. Yes, there are notebooks at Block 5. I wrote everything down. Every experiment, every victim. The lieutenant's eyes widened. Show me. Elias led the lieutenant and 2 other soldiers to Block 5. The doors were open, the rooms partially ransacked. But in Victor Falcon's office, in a metal cabinet that hadn't been forced open, Elias found what he was looking for. 12 notebooks filled with his cramped handwriting. 3 years' worth of meticulous notes on Victor Falcon's crimes. The lieutenant leafed through them, his face growing paler and paler. My God, this is evidence for war crimes trials. Elias acquiesced. I wanted the world to know. I wanted to make sure that what happened here would never be forgotten. But he wasn't telling the whole truth. He wasn't saying that he had also killed Victor Falcon, that these notebooks were both a testimony and a hidden confession. Because between the lines of scientific data, between the clinical descriptions of the experiments, lay the trace of his crime, the dose of phenobarbital he had noted down the day before the fatal demonstration, the detail about the lock on the cold storage room door that he had mentioned in a seemingly innocuous note. If someone were to read these notebooks carefully enough, with enough medical knowledge, they could reconstruct what really happened on May 7, 1943. But Elias bet that no one would, because Victor Falcon was already dead. Because the Allies were looking for living criminals to try, not ghosts. And because in the chaos of the war's end, who would care exactly how a Nazi doctor had died? The following weeks were a whirlwind of interrogations, testimonies, and medical procedures. Elias was examined by American doctors who were horrified by his physical condition, weighing barely 45 kilos, with scars from malnutrition, rotten teeth, and damaged lungs. But he was alive. Against all odds, he was alive. In June 1945, he was offered an opportunity. The American Army was looking for doctors who could testify at future war crimes trials. Elias had the qualifications and the evidence. He was offered the chance to come to the United States, obtain a special visa, and start his life anew there. You could help ensure that justice is done, lui dit le capitaine qui coordonnait le programme. Your testimony could help convict dozens of Nazi war criminals. Justice. The word resonated strangely in Elias's mind, because he had already delivered his own justice. He had killed Victor Falcon with his own hands. Was that enough? Or did he now have to spend the rest of his life testifying against other monsters? He accepted. Because he had nothing else. Because returning to Poland meant returning to a destroyed country, filled with ghosts. Because in the United States, perhaps he could forget. Perhaps he could finally sleep without seeing the faces of the dead children in the vats of ice. In September 1945, Elias Mercer boarded a ship bound for New York. In his suitcase he had almost nothing. A few clothes given to him by the Red Cross, the 12 notebooks of his testimony, and a secret he carried with him and would never share with anyone. He settled in Brooklyn in a small apartment in the Brighton Beach neighborhood where many European refugees lived. He changed his name. Elias Mercer became Noah Grayson, a new name for a new life. To forget who he had been, to forget what he had done. He testified at the Nuremberg trials in 1946, recounting the horrors of Block 5 before an international tribunal. His notebooks were added to the case file as evidence. The judges listened with expressions of growing horror. The world discovered the existence of Nazi medical experiments. But Victor Falcon wasn't in the dock. He was dead. Officially, the victim of a tragic accident. And Elias, now Noah, never corrected that version. Nearly 50 years had passed since the end of the war. Noah Grayson, the man who had once been Elias Mercer, was now 84 years old. He lived in a modest house in Westchester, a suburb of New York City. He had rebuilt his life piece by piece. A respected general practitioner for 40 years, married in 1952 to a nurse named Catherine, 2 adopted children, a quiet, normal, almost ordinary life. Almost. Because every night for 50 years Noah saw the same nightmare. Victor Falcon through the frosted porthole, his eyes glazed, his body trembling, dying slowly while he, Elias, remained outside knowing he could have opened the door at any moment, knowing he had chosen not to. Catherine had died 3 years earlier from cancer. The children were grown, married, living their own lives. Noah was alone now, with his memories and his secrets. One October morning there was a knock at his door. Noah opened it and found himself face to face with a young woman of about 35, with red hair tied back in a ponytail and round glasses. She was carrying a briefcase and an identification badge. "Dr. Grayson, my name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm a historian specializing in Nazi war crimes. May I speak with you for a few minutes?" Noah felt his heart race. After 50 years, someone was coming to ask questions. About what? "Dr. Victor Falcon and the Dachau experiments. I have read your testimonies at the Nuremberg trials. I would like to ask you a few questions for my research." Noah hesitated, then opened the door wide. "Come in." They sat down in the living room. Lauren took several files out of her briefcase. "I'm working on a book documenting all the Nazi medical experiments. I spent 2 years searching through the Nuremberg archives, and I found something interesting in your notebooks." Noah maintained a neutral expression, but inside, panic was beginning to rise. "What did you find?" Lauren opened a file and took out photocopies of handwritten pages, pages that Elias had written 50 years earlier. "Here, on May 6, 1943, you note that a stock of phenobarbital was used for an experiment on the interaction between drugs and hypothermia. A prisoner died within 20 minutes after injection and immersion." "Yes, I remember." "And the next day, May 7, 1943, Victor Falcon had his fatal accident in the cold storage room. But there is no mention of phenobarbital in the autopsy report from the Munich hospital." Noah felt his mouth go dry. "I don't understand what you're getting at." Lauren looked him straight in the eyes. "Dr. Grayson, I'm not here to accuse you. I'm a historian, not a prosecutor. But I've reconstructed what really happened that day. Falcon drank coffee laced with phenobarbital. Someone locked the walk-in freezer door while he was inside. The combination of the two caused his death." Silence fell in the room. Noah looked out the window, toward the garden where Catherine had planted roses. He could deny it. He could lie. After 50 years, who could prove anything? But he was tired. So tired of carrying this secret. So tired of living with the guilt. "No one ever asked me that question," he said softly. "For 50 years, no one ever sought to know the truth. They just wanted to hear about the horrors of Falcon, not how he died." "So it's true? You killed him?" Noah closed his eyes. "Yes. I put phenobarbital in his coffee. I created a diversion. I locked the door. And I watched him die through the porthole." Lauren remained silent for a moment, absorbing this confession. Then she asked, "Why?" "Because he was using children in his experiments. Because I could no longer remain passive. Because I thought that if I killed him, perhaps I would save all those who were going to die in the following weeks. And you succeeded. Block 5 was closed after his death. Yes, I saved maybe 100, 200 people." Noah opened his eyes and looked at Lauren. "But for 50 years I wondered if I'd been right. If killing a man, even a monster, was justifiable. If by becoming a murderer, I hadn't become a little like him." Lauren put down her papers. "Dr. Grayson, I'm not a theologian. I can't tell you if what you did was morally right. But I can tell you this. Victor Falcon tortured and killed over 300 people in cold blood, in the name of a perverted science. You killed a man to prevent him from killing more. There is a difference." "Really?" "Because we both decided that a human life could be sacrificed for a greater purpose. The only difference is that I thought my purpose was noble." "The difference," Lauren replied firmly, "is that Victor Falcon killed innocent people. You killed a criminal. Context matters. Circumstances matter." Noah shook his head. "I'd like to believe that, I really do. But every night for the past 50 years, I see her face. I see her eyes through the porthole. And I wonder if I could have done things differently, if I could have found another way. What other way? You were a prisoner in a concentration camp. You had no power, no authority, no legal recourse. Falcon was protected by the entire Nazi system. What else could you do? I don't know, but that's what haunts me. The fact of not knowing. Lauren put her documents in her briefcase. Dr. Grayson, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to write in my book exactly what happened. The whole truth about Victor Falcon and his death. Because history deserves to know the whole truth, even the complicated parts, even the parts that aren't black and white. Noah looked at her, surprised. Are you going to reveal what I did? Yes. But I'm also going to explain the context. Who Falcon was. What he was doing. Why you acted. And I'll let the readers decide for themselves whether your action was justifiable or not. And legally? Could I be prosecuted? Lauren shook her head. The crimes committed at Dachau fall under the military jurisdiction of the time. And even if someone wanted to prosecute you, the statute of limitations has long since expired. No, Dr. Grayson, you risk nothing legally, but perhaps revealing the truth will finally allow you to find peace. After Lauren left, Noah sat in his living room for hours. For the first time in 50 years, he had spoken the truth out loud. He had admitted what he had done. And strangely, he felt lighter. That night, for the first time in decades, Noah Grayson slept without having nightmares. Lauren Whitaker's book was published in 1995 under the title, Doctors of Death: Medical Crimes in Nazi Camps. An entire chapter was devoted to Victor Falcon and Elias Mercer. The complete story was told, without moral judgment, just the facts. The book sparked intense debate in academic and ethical circles. Some argued that Elias Mercer was a hero who had done what needed to be done. Others maintained that he had no right to take the law into his own hands, that even a monster deserved a trial. Noah Grayson never participated in the debate. He gave only one interview to Lauren to accompany the publication of the book, in which he simply said, I don't know if I was right. I never will. All I know is that in that impossible situation, I did what my conscience told me to do. And I've lived with the consequences for 50 years, that's all I can say. Noah Grayson died peacefully in his sleep in 1997 at the age of 87. At his funeral, more than 200 people came to pay their respects. Former patients, fellow doctors, his children and grandchildren, and Lauren Whitaker, who placed a copy of her book on his grave with a handwritten dedication, to the man who had to choose between surviving and living. Thank you for trusting me with your truth. The story of Victor Falcon and Elias Mercer raises a question that has no easy answer. How far can one go in the name of justice? When does revenge become legitimate self-defense? And above all, how does one remain human when forced to live in an inhuman world? These questions still concern us today. Because history repeats itself. Because atrocities continue to be committed. And because each of us, faced with absolute injustice, must choose, remain passive or act, knowing that action could transform us into something we do not want to become. Elias Mercer made his choice. He lived with it. He paid the psychological price for 50 years. Was it the right choice? Only you can decide. But ask yourself this question. If you were in his place, in that laboratory of horror, seeing children die day after day, what would you have done? Would you have had the courage to act? Or would you have chosen to survive by turning a blind eye? The story of the Nazi doctor and the prisoner who killed him is not just a story about the Second World War. It's a story about human nature, about what we are capable of doing, for good and for evil, when we are pushed to our limits. And it's a story we must never forget, because those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. What would you do if you were in Elias Mercer's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to discover more stories the world has tried to erase. Stories of crime, justice, and those impossible choices that define our humanity.